Accepting a simple favor not only almost cost me my life, but it also left me with scars that are present whenever I go to sleep. I often have nightmares, waking up with my heart racing, screaming, or sometimes saying nonsensical things, like asking for help or trying to escape from who knows what. For some time, my parents had been calling me, asking for help to find a new house to move into. According to them, the house they had recently bought was possessed by the demon, the devil Lucifer, and other names that were probably made up. I remained skeptical and honestly paid them little attention. The truth is, I didn't feel any urgency to do them that favor because we had had some differences. And for those personal reasons, I didn't even know this new house. I had never visited them there. That's how I ended up telling my partner everything while we were patrolling the city. He told me I was making a mistake by ignoring everything my parents were telling me. In addition, they were living with my sister, and even she would tell me about the paranormal things happening in the house. Some of them seemed straight out of horror movies, and she would even cry while telling me about them. He couldn't understand how I could be insensitive to my family's desperation, but my partner opened my eyes, and within a few days, I informed them that I had found the perfect house for them. They assured me they were going to sell the other one and made an agreement with the owners to pay for it in very reasonable installments. On moving day, my mother called me and said that some boxes were left in her room, and since no one wanted to go back, she asked me to do her a favor and get them before my shift ended that night. I mentioned this to my partner, and he told me to go, saying he would wait for me at the station and that he would come up with any excuse if anyone asked. I thanked him and went to the house to do that favor for my mother. I was relaxed, not even stressed or anxious. I arrived at the door, opened it with the keys my mother told me were under the mat, and went inside. It was a very beautiful house. I loved the finishes, and for a moment I even considered buying it. I called my mother, asked her which room it was, and she gave me details since the place was huge. I climbed the stairs, entered the correct room, and saw the boxes on my mother's bed. But then I noticed one of the boxes was on the floor, opened with its contents spilled out. It seemed very strange to me that they had left it like that without picking it up, but I hardly thought about it and just started gathering the things. I took the first box downstairs and placed it in the back of the patrol car. But when I went back inside to get the second box, I started hearing noises coming from the second floor. I called out and asked if anyone was there, but no one responded. I immediately put my hand on my weapon, and then someone called my name. It was a female voice saying my name, and I started climbing the stairs slowly, preparing myself for anything. When I got to the hallway that separated the rooms, I was in for a big surprise. The box that should have been on my mother's bed was there, again on the floor, next to the door. There was no way it could have gotten there just from a breeze coming through the window, and that confirmed to me that I wasn't alone in the house. Suddenly I heard many people talking, laughing, and shouting. I drew my weapon and gripped it firmly. I called out again to see who would answer, and then in the back, I saw the figure of a man watching me from one of the rooms wearing very dirty and torn clothes. I immediately shouted at him not to move and to raise his hands, but he just ignored me and kept staring at me. I couldn't see his face clearly because it was too dark, but I could tell the guy was smiling. Then the door in front of him slammed shut with an incredibly strong speed that I don't know how it didn't break. Throughout this time, the voices didn't stop. They were calling me, and then something I couldn't see grabbed my foot, causing me to fall and hit my head. I couldn't break free, and it dragged me across the vestibule, slamming me against the wall. I gathered my strength as best as I could to get back on my feet and managed to get out. But before reaching the door, multiple laughs could be heard at the same time, as if a single entity was making them, along with deep voices shouting insults that I couldn't understand. Fortunately, I managed to get out of there. I immediately went to my parents' new house, and from there, they took me to a hospital. I had to tell the chief that some thieves did it because no one would have believed the real story, and at the end of the day, only my family was there for me. From that moment on, I understood them. They were telling the truth. The devil was lurking in the house. I clearly knew I wouldn't find an explanation, and I wasn't going to put another family who had nothing to do with it in danger, which is why we had the house demolished, hoping that something dark would never happen in that place again. As a police officer, I have had some special cases where my colleagues and superiors helped me continue in the profession. But at the same time, these cases have put me in such controversial situations that I wonder if we are truly capable of combating the real evil that exists in the world. We can't be everywhere, and that day I realized that when faced with the unknown, there's nothing we can do. Just be spectators and go on with our lives. It happened one time when I was patrolling the city streets around 10 at night. My partner was sick with a terrible fever. He had spent the previous night in the hospital, a place he didn't like at all. I thought it must have been something serious for him to go there. As I was driving, I talked to him and he joked, asking if I missed him and all that. It at least kept me distracted. And then the patrol radio sounded. They informed me there was an emergency call from a house, apparently from a woman suffering domestic violence at the hands of her partner. They told me to get there immediately, and after they gave me the address, I floored the accelerator to get there as quickly as possible. I was just minutes away from arriving when I got a call from the station telling me that something didn't add up. That woman who had called was reported as dead 5 days ago. None of it made sense, but I still said I wanted to get to the house. On the way, a colleague at the station informed me that the woman's body had never been found while the case was under investigation, and she was declared dead based on a statement from her husband. I didn't understand this case. If there was no body, they couldn't consider her dead just because of what the husband said. They should have easily taken him as the prime suspect, but I didn't want to play detective while driving, especially not at that speed. My colleague warned me and told me to be careful. Before I arrived, she suggested that if I noticed anything strange or out of the ordinary, I should request backup immediately. She would be ready to send support the moment I said so. I agreed, and it gave me some comfort knowing that someone at the station was really looking out for us officers. I finally arrived at the house. It was a 2-story, white, very beautiful house. I passed by the well-kept garden and rang the doorbell. Almost immediately I heard a woman's voice in the distance saying to come in, but the house was in complete darkness. Something told me that doing that was a very bad idea, but I wanted to get to the bottom of it. I decided to enter with my gun and flashlight in hand, checking room by room. The house was completely silent, the atmosphere was very gloomy, and I felt tense not knowing what was going on. Everything seemed strange to me, and it didn't make much sense that the woman didn't say anything more after telling me to come in. I assumed she was being threatened by her husband to keep quiet and not make any noise at all. But I decided to keep investigating until suddenly I heard hollow thumps on the second floor, which must have come from one of the rooms. I carefully opened the rooms one by one until I found where those thumps were coming from, but they were all empty, until I got to the last one, and I heard those hollow thumps again. I entered that last room ready to find the guy and the woman tied up and needing help, but it was empty too. The whole house was completely empty, and even though the thumps were coming from there was no one who could have caused them, or at least no one I could see. It was then that suddenly I heard those thumps again and the crying of a woman, but they were coming from behind a wall. The woman was crying uncontrollably in great pain, and I was shocked by the situation and quickly looked for something to break through that drywall until I finally managed to make a hole, and a smell hit me instantly. The stench was unbearable, and there it was, the decomposing body of a poor woman. I quickly called for backup as well as my colleague and explained everything to her. The patrols arrived, and then the people in charge of removing the body, and sure enough, it was the missing woman. On her body, they found strangulation marks and remnants of another person's skin under her nails, which, after the investigation, were confirmed to be her husband's, and that was enough to build a case where he ended up confessing to everything he did. He was convicted and justice was served, but I spent entire nights thinking about how it was possible for me to have heard the cries of a woman who was already dead, and for her to be able to pound on the wall, asking for help and demand the justice she deserved over the phone. It simply wasn't possible. But that's what happened. I remember how a simple phone call changed the way my partner and I see the world. The unknown overwhelms what man knows, and there was no doubt about that after what we experienced. We were at the station when I received a call on my personal number. A man speaking in a desperate tone told me he was in grave danger. He said my name, my partner's name, and then the names of our families. At that moment, I realized the matter was serious, and I listened carefully to his words. He wasn't threatening me. Rather, I felt he said that to ensure I kept this discreet. Then he gave me an address and told me he needed us to go there before hanging up. I told my partner about it and mentioned that, regardless, he shouldn't stray too far from the radio. We could call for backup at any moment. On our way to the address, we called our families to confirm they were all right, and indeed they were. The only thing left was to find out what that man wanted and how he got not only my number, but all the information about us. We arrived at his house and we didn't even have to knock. The door opened as soon as we stepped onto the porch. We entered and immediately heard the man's voice calling us. He was in the living room, sitting in a chair in front of a table with a Ouija board on it. The man kept his hand on the board, and as soon as we got closer, he told us that he couldn't lift his hand from it, or terrible things would happen in the house. My partner and I looked at each other a bit skeptical, thinking this might be a very bad joke. He was the one who approached the man and, without any respect, told him that if he continued with this game, things would go very badly for him with us. He ordered him to stand up and come with us to the station. The man refused, saying that it wasn't possible, and then my partner lost his composure and patience. He grabbed the Ouija board and pulled it away from the table along with the man's hand. Seconds later, something we couldn't see struck my partner, slamming him against one of the walls. I pulled out my weapon, but I didn't know who or what to shoot at. I looked at my partner, who was choking. Whatever had hit him was squeezing his throat with incredible force. You could see his skin being twisted. It had to be some kind of ghost or evil specter. I tried to help him, but then I was hit in the face the same way he was, leaving me dazed and lying on the floor. When I got up, I grabbed the board and put it back on the table, and the man placed his hand on it. My partner was released from whatever was strangling him and began making an effort to fill his lungs with air again. I immediately rushed to his aid. We understood that the man wasn't lying to us. He really couldn't take his hand off the board. Once my partner recovered, he asked the man why he had called us if we couldn't deal with something like that. He then confessed that on the second floor of the house, he had his baby, and he called us to take her out of the house since he was a lost cause. My colleague went upstairs and indeed came back down with the little one in his arms. The man told us to leave, that the pact he made had to be fulfilled, and asked us to please take his daughter to her grandparents. We left the house, and seconds later a terrible gut-wrenching scream was heard. That day the man disappeared and he was never found or seen again. We sent the baby to her grandparents just as he had asked, and we never spoke of that enigmatic and paranormal case again. My hands have never trembled when facing hitmen, criminals, thieves, or any madmen. Mentally, I was more than prepared if the situation called for it. But there was one time when we didn't know what we were up against. My partner and I were scared to death and shocked by the gruesome scene we witnessed. It seemed like a night like any other. We had just left the bakery we liked so much. Everything was quiet, no reports, no emergency calls. I was just driving while my partner talked to me about how things were going with his girlfriend. Apparently, he was thinking about ending the relationship since they had been arguing a lot lately. I knew the real reason was that he had cheated on her. I kept telling him that at some point he'd have to pay for everything he'd done, and he agreed. But he kept saying that he would leave it up to karma and that he prayed a lot to God, asking for forgiveness every night. It doesn't work like that, but I didn't waste my time trying to make him understand. That's when we got the call. It was a distress call very close to where we were. Apparently, a man had been attacked in the middle of the road, and a witness had made the call before fleeing and disappearing from there. The clock showed 10 at night. It was strange for something like that to happen on the road without anyone intervening. We thought the attacker must have had some kind of dangerous weapon, so we were prepared. I wish someone had warned us or told us what we were about to see. It might sound cowardly on my part, but If I had known, I wouldn't have responded to that call for help, and I'm sure my partner wouldn't have either. We arrived at the road, and in the distance we saw a body on the ground, and a black thing on top of it. I floored the accelerator, stopped about 25 feet from them, and then we saw it. It wasn't a man on top of the body, but a thing or strange animal with black fur, like a kind of huge wolf but with a horrible appearance and abnormally long limbs. It was using its snout to devour everything from the body, which was obviously lifeless. I couldn't even look at my partner. I turned into a statue at that moment. That thing kept moving the body and biting it, and from where we were we could hear the sound of flesh being torn from the skin, and the whole place was filled with blood. I drew my weapon. It was clear we had to act, but my partner stopped me, grabbing my arm and telling me that if the bullets didn't kill that thing, then we'd be next. He was right, but I was filled with frustration at the thought that if we let it go, it would keep doing that to other people, and maybe we wouldn't get there in time again. We got a call from the station at that moment, and we didn't hesitate to request backup, arguing that it was a huge beast, and that's when we received the orders to shoot immediately. My partner kept refusing, but then he let go of me and said that if I got out of the car, he would lock the door so I couldn't get back in, as he wasn't going to risk his life for the corpse that thing was eating. I aimed and didn't hesitate to empty the clip, confident in myself and sure that I would hit it. The bullets penetrated its skin, and then it fled, leaving a trail of blood that the reinforcements followed when they arrived shortly after. In the end, that trail led them to an alley where it suddenly disappeared without any explanation. And on the ground were the bullets I had fired. We didn't understand what happened to the beast and why the bullets were lying there with no body on the ground. At the station, they declared the case closed, and the man on the road was written off as a vagrant. It didn't seem right to me not to conduct an investigation, but deep down, I wanted to forget everything that happened. And apparently, my superiors did too. In the end, everything was hidden away in a file,